Stupid. That's the most ridiculous, horrifying story I've ever heard. It's crazy. I mean,
What if I told you the most iconic voice in pop music? The one that moonwalked across stadiums and whispered its way into the hearts of millions? Wasn't just a sound, but a survival instinct? That behind every breath, every cry, every perfectly timed silence, was a man quietly unraveling? Michael Jackson didn't just sing, he bled, grieved, and searched for something the spotlight could never give him. There are singers, and then there was Michael Jackson, a man whose voice defied expectations and whose performances transcended mere entertainment. His vocal abilities were unmatched, delicate like silk one moment, thunderous and commanding the next, and then soaring with a purity that felt almost supernatural. Michael didn't just sing songs, he embodied them. He turned performances into deeply emotional experiences, moments where even he seemed to forget he was human. And in those moments, we forgot too. We witnessed something beyond talent, something sacred, vulnerable, and transformative. One such unforgettable moment came during the iconic Motown 25 television special. While most remember it for the debut of the moonwalk during Billie Jean, the real soul of that evening emerged when Michael reunited with his brothers to perform Never Can Say Goodbye. As he sang, his voice trembled with memories, experience, and pain. He was no longer the high-pitched boy wonder of the Jackson 5, but a man carrying years of distance, pressure, and longing. That performance was not just a nod to the past, it was an act of reliving. Every sustained note held emotion earned through life, not rehearsed in a studio. His falsetto was no longer bright and innocent. It was weathered and aching, reflecting someone trying to grasp something already lost. When he closed his eyes mid-line, we saw a child in a studio, singing of heartbreak he hadn't known, now grown, having lived through heartbreaks countless times. That wasn't nostalgia. It was resurrection. Another moment of rare spiritual power came in 1989, during the tribute to Sammy Davis Jr. on the occasion of his 60th anniversary in show business. The setting was filled with legends, the pressure immense. Michael didn't enter with a spectacle, he didn't dance, didn't even move much. Dressed in all white, he stepped on stage like a man entering a sacred place. What followed was arguably one of the most heartfelt vocal performances of his career. Singing You Were There, he began softly, reverently, his voice almost like a prayer. As the song progressed, something within him stirred, not volume, but raw emotion. His tone turned glassy, his breaths labored, not from nerves, but from sincerity. Each note sounded like it hurt to release. It was not about impressing, it was about offering a piece of his soul. By the climax, when he held the final note like a whispered farewell, even the most stoic audience members were moved. Michael wasn't just honoring a great man, he was becoming one. His performance became a quiet explosion of grace. Fast forward to the Dangerous World Tour, an era known for its grand theatrics and immense crowds. Yet, within all the noise and spectacle, there was one moment of surprising stillness that touched fans deeply. I Just Can't Stop Loving You. Amid a massive stadium, the lights would dim, and the music would soften to a whisper. Then came Michael's voice. Breathy, fragile, intimate. It wasn't a performance anymore, it was a confession. He danced not just with his body, but with his voice, stretching, bending, whispering, and occasionally letting it burst into full cry. The falsetto cracked, shook, and that imperfection made it all the more real. When he reached the line, I just can't stop, and let Loving You echo across the stadium, the roar of the crowd was paradoxically intimate. Amid a tour built on spectacle, this was Michael completely unguarded, giving us his heart. Then there was Lovely One, during the Bad Tour in Yokohama, a performance that blended unmatched energy with sheer technical skill. From the first moment, Michael's vocal delivery was like a rhythmic weapon, sharp, syncopated, breathless. Most singers would have been winded within a few bars, but Michael danced with relentless energy while delivering rapid-fire vocal punches. Yet, behind the funk and groove was a level of vocal complexity few could rival. He delivered staccato lines, syncopated phrasing, scatting, and harmonized bursts that bordered on jazz improvisation. It wasn't just energetic, it was vocally athletic, and it all sounded effortless. Lovely One wasn't just a fast-paced dance number, it was a lesson in vocal precision and performance endurance. Another transcendent moment happened at the 1988 Grammys when Michael performed Man in the Mirror. There were no flashy theatrics, no choreography. He simply stood there and sang truth. His voice at first trembled, a bit hesitant but sincere. By the second verse, the words took hold. Something lit within him. As the choir joined in, he turned into a preacher of sorts. Eyes closed, fists clenched, shouting the lyrics like they were his testimony. By the final chorus, there was no restraint. His voice screamed, cracked, and broke, but never lost its soul. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was real. The silence that followed the performance said it all. The audience hadn't just heard a song, they had witnessed a spiritual moment. Then there was Rock With You from the Bad Tour in Yokohama. Most people know the polished disco studio version, but the live rendition was a raw, sensual reimagining. Michael sang as if wrapped inside the groove, twisting notes like light through a prism. His falsetto soared above the thumping bass, and at any moment he would dive into a growl or break the melody entirely just to ride the emotion. Gone was the polish. In its place was something organic, primal, and deeply soulful. Despite the intense physicality of his performance, his voice never faltered. He wasn't singing to the music, he was the music. Tucked away in the Jacksons' catalog is Different Kind of Lady, a song that showcases some of Michael's most underrated vocal work. The track is layered thick with harmonies, intricate phrasing, and powerful rhythm. Michael's voice dances above the synths and snapping drums with surgical precision. He flips effortlessly between chest voice and falsetto, growling one moment and sweetly floating the next. What's astonishing is how controlled it all is. Each layer masterfully placed, every harmony intentional. This wasn't just Michael the singer, it was Michael the producer, the vocal architect. That such a complex and powerful performance remains relatively unknown only proves how casually he could create vocal brilliance. But if there's one song that encapsulates Michael's voice as a tool of pure, unfiltered emotion, it's Earth Song. And nowhere was its impact greater than during the 1996 performance in Brunei. On that stage, Michael didn't just perform, he cried out like a prophet witnessing the end of days. His voice roared with urgency, cracked with sorrow, and vibrated with pain. Every line felt like a plea, every growl a warning. He wasn't acting, he was feeling too much, too deeply. When he collapsed to his knees, gripping the mic like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, you could feel the emotional gravity. He didn't just sing Earth Song, he bled it. Even during the final stretch of his life in the This Is It rehearsals, Michael's voice hadn't lost its essence. He was older, visibly tired, but his voice remained unfiltered and authentic. He hummed, improvised, switched keys mid-phrase, and yet it still sounded unmistakably like him. These rehearsals proved that Michael's voice wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. Even when stripped of performance, costumes, and polish, his voice had a soul of its own. At that point, he wasn't chasing excellence, he was simply trying to feel the music one last time. One of the most emotionally resonant performances of his later years came during the 2001 30th anniversary celebration, when he sang, I'll Be There. This was the song that introduced the world to the magical voice of a young boy from Gary, Indiana. Now, decades later, that same boy stood older, wounded, but full of gratitude. The song no longer sounded like a promise to a lover. It sounded like a vow to his fans, his family, and to himself. He took his time with each note, savoring the emotion behind every word. When his voice cracked on the final line, just call my name and I'll be there. It wasn't weakness, it was history. It was a goodbye cloaked in melody. Michael Jackson didn't just perform songs, he lived inside them. His voice was never just about pitch or power. It was about vulnerability, truth, and connection. He used his voice to cry out, to celebrate, to grieve, and to uplift. At times, it felt like he wasn't merely human when he sang. He became a vessel for something bigger. Whether on massive stages in front of millions or in quiet, sacred moments, Michael Jackson's voice reminded us that some gifts are not just rare, they are timeless. These weren't just great performances, they were emotional ceremonies, and for that reason, they remain unforgettable. To understand Michael Jackson's voice is to go beyond the mechanics of pitch, range, or control. It's to understand that his instrument was shaped not just by training, but by trauma, triumph, and time. His voice evolved with him, aging like a living diary. What began as a piercing, cherubic tone in childhood eventually matured into something deeper, more nuanced, capable of expressing not just melodies, but entire emotional universes. And that evolution wasn't accidental. It was sculpted through years of meticulous self-exploration and an almost supernatural ability to feel a song, not just sing it. Long before the world labeled him the king of pop, Michael was a student of music. Not just pop, but gospel, classical, funk, soul, jazz. He listened obsessively. He studied phrasing like a poet studies syllables. He broke down James Brown's rhythmic grunts, Marvin Gaye's velvety whispers, and Donny Hathaway's gospel cries. But instead of imitation, he synthesized. His sound became its own language, a mosaic of the greats filtered through his unique sensibility. Even in early Jackson 5 recordings like Who's Lovin' You, you could hear a young boy channeling heartache far beyond his years. It was like he had a back door into emotions he hadn't yet lived, but would someday be consumed by. And that's part of the paradox that made Michael so compelling. The innocence of a child paired with the emotional fluency of a soul twice his age. As he aged, life gave context to the feelings he used to only perform. Fame, isolation, betrayal, love, loss, they all took up residence in his voice. By the time he sang songs like Stranger in Moscow or Will You Be There, he wasn't drawing from imagination. He was drawing from wounds. Every whisper, grunt, and cry was autobiographical. His ballads in particular reveal this duality. Take She's Out of My Life, for example. On the surface, it's a simple breakup song, but in Michael's hands, it becomes a slow unraveling. Each word is delivered like it's too heavy to carry. There's a tremble in his breath, a pause between phrases that feels like hesitation from heartbreak. And at the very end, famously, he breaks down. Some thought it was theater, a staged vulnerability. But Michael later confirmed it wasn't. That emotional collapse happened every time he sang it. Because it was real. It was memory, not melody. Live performances of this song were even more visceral. You could see him battling tears, gripping the microphone like a lifeline. And the audience? Silent. Because they weren't watching a singer, they were witnessing a man confronting loss in real time. This was the essence of his gift, to make millions of strangers feel like they were the only one in the room with him, bearing witness to something sacred. Michael's power wasn't limited to slow songs, though. In up-tempo tracks, his voice became an instrument of rhythm. His vocals would weave in and out of the beat like a drum line. Songs like Wanna Be Startin' Something or Don't Stop Till You Get Enough showcased a kind of vocal percussion that was both melodic and percussive. He didn't just sing with the rhythm, he was the rhythm. He'd throw in rhythmic yelps, glottal stops, on-the-fly ad-libs, and syncopated moans, often improvising in ways that blurred the line between singing and beatboxing. What's more astonishing is how effortlessly he maintained this while dancing full out. Most artists sacrifice one or the other. Michael sacrificed nothing. His breath control was superhuman. Listen to any live version of Smooth Criminal. Not only is he sprinting across the stage, performing choreographed routines with sniper-like precision, But his vocal delivery is machine tight, rapid, biting, and pitch perfect. Yet it never feels robotic. There's always soul behind the execution. And speaking of soul, few artists have ever tapped into the spiritual realm the way Michael did during performances like Will You Be There? On record, it's a lush orchestral piece with gospel overtones. But live, it became something else entirely. As the choir swelled behind him, Michael would raise his arms as if drawing power from the heavens. His voice would tremble, then surge as if carried by something unseen. By the time he reached the spoken word section, "In our darkest hour, will you still care?" his voice was no longer singing. It was pleading, praying, questioning. And in that moment, the division between artist and audience would dissolve. Everyone felt it. These weren't just concerts, they were ceremonies. Yet for all his vocal majesty, Michael Jackson was not without struggle. The perfectionism that made his music great also haunted him. He was known to do hundreds of takes in the studio, obsessing over the tiniest inflection. He'd layer harmonies with microscopic precision, often singing every part himself, soprano, alto, tenor. He'd isolate breaths, re-record syllables, and craft vocal arrangements like a sculptor chiseling marble. But that perfectionism came at a cost. Emotionally, it drained him. Physically, it pushed him to extremes. And psychologically, it isolated him. This is perhaps why the rawest moments of his career stand out so vividly, because they cut through the polish. Performances like Gone Too Soon or You Are Not Alone revealed a Michael stripped of spectacle. Just a voice. A man in mourning. There was no choreography to hide behind, no production effects to distract. Just honesty. And that honesty was devastating. When he sang You're Always in My Heart, you knew he was talking to more than just the character in the song. He was reaching out to every loss he had endured. The truth is, Michael's voice was never just about sound. It was about feeling. And that feeling came from a place of deep empathy. He felt the world's pain intensely. That's why songs like Earth Song hit so hard. They weren't written from an outsider's perspective. He didn't observe suffering, he absorbed it. Whether it was environmental destruction, war, racism, or child abuse, he sang with the urgency of someone whose heart carried the weight of it all. Even his more subtle performances carried this emotional weight. In Human Nature, his delivery is featherlight, almost dreamlike. But listen closely and you'll hear an undercurrent of loneliness. Looking out across the nighttime, the city winks a sleepless eye. It's a song about wonder, yes, but also disconnection. A man adrift in the very world he's enchanted by. That duality is what makes it linger. You dance, but you also ache. Michael's vocal versatility extended beyond emotion. Technically, he was a phenomenon. He had a 5-octave range. His falsetto was clean and pure. His lower register was smooth, smoky, underused but potent. He could growl like a blues singer, whisper like a lover, belt like a Broadway star. He could harmonize with himself in complex, gospel-inspired stacks. And all of this wasn't theoretical. It was felt in performance after performance, year after year. Even in his later years, as time and wear began to touch his voice, he adapted. He sang softer, more conversationally. He allowed imperfections to show. And ironically, this made his voice even more powerful. In rehearsal footage from This Is It, his vocals are stripped back, raw, but the soul, unshakable. The humanity, louder than ever. He wasn't hiding behind production anymore. He was just a man, trying to connect through music. One last time. His final public moments with music were filled with longing. At the 30th anniversary show during I'll Be There, his voice carried decades of weight. He didn't sing it like a child anymore. He sang it like someone who had lived through loss, fame, betrayal, and love, and still wanted to be there for those who believed in him. When his voice cracked at the end, it wasn't a flaw. It was the sound of a heart saying goodbye. To analyze Michael Jackson only through charts, awards, or sales figures is to miss the point entirely. His true legacy isn't just in what he achieved, but in what he made people feel. His voice was never a tool for vanity. It was a vessel for healing, hope, and truth. He gave pieces of himself with every note, sometimes too much. And in return, the world felt seen, understood, lifted. There's a reason his performances still circulate today, not as relics, but as rituals. People don't just watch them, they return to them, like prayer, like medicine. Because deep down, we all remember what it felt like when that voice filled a room. Not just technically perfect, but spiritually overwhelming. He reminded us that voices, real voices, can break chains, open hearts, and raise the dead parts of ourselves we thought we'd buried. These were the moments when Michael Jackson forgot he was human. And maybe that's why we'll never forget him. Michael Jackson's voice wasn't just extraordinary, it was a mirror of everything he carried. Pain, wonder, loneliness, magic. Every whisper, growl, and falsetto wasn't just musical genius, it was emotional truth. If this story moved you, even a little, consider liking the video and sharing your thoughts below. What's the one MJ performance you always return to? I read every comment.